A man who survived his own apocalypse wakes in a galaxy where apocalypse never ends. The sky bleeds colors with no names, and daemons wear the faces of his oldest nightmares. His sword has killed gods before, but here, gods are just the beginning. How long can one man's rage burn in a universe built entirely from it? The sky above Charon's fall burned with colors that had no names in the tongues of mortal men. Violet and sickly green bled together like infected wounds across the firmament, while the three moons hung motionless in defiance of celestial law. The feudal world had known 1,000 years of quiet devotion to the god emperor, its people raising stone cathedrals with their hands and offering prayers in high Gothic they barely understood. Now those cathedrals stood broken. Their towers had become perches for things that wore the skins of men like ill-fitting coats. The fields where wheat once grew now sprouted forests of bone, pale and glistening, reaching toward the corrupted heavens as though in supplication to newer, hungrier gods. In the ruins of what had been the fortress monastery of the Order of the Ebon Vigil, a rift had opened 3 nights prior. It was not a clean tear in reality, but a ragged wound, edges flickering with unreality, exhaling a wind that tasted of copper and madness. Through it had poured daemons of the warp, lesser entities mostly, screamers and fleshhounds and chittering things without proper form. The local garrison had died to the last man. Their bodies decorated the battlements now, arranged in patterns that suggested ritual purpose, their faces locked in expressions of ecstatic horror. And through that same rift, hurled by forces beyond comprehension or caring, came something else. He struck the ground like a meteor of meat and iron, carving a furrow through the ashen earth deep enough to bury a chimera transport. The impact sent tremors through the bedrock, toppling the few standing walls that remained of the monastery's outer ring. Dust rose in a choking cloud, grey and thick, occluding the nightmare sky for precious seconds. When it settled, the figure lay motionless at the crater's heart, surrounded by shattered stone and the twisted wreckage of what might once have been sacred icons. The armor he wore was black, so black it seemed to devour light, edged in silver that gleamed with an almost painful brightness. It covered him from neck to boot, segmented plates overlapping in configurations that resembled no pattern the Adeptus Mechanicus had ever sanctioned. One pauldron bore the face of a beast, snarling and hollow-eyed. The other had been torn away entirely, leaving bare the scarred flesh beneath. Across his back rested a weapon that defied categorization, a slab of raw metal too massive to be called a sword, too crude to be called a relic, its edge nicked and stained with substances that ranged from rust red to oil black. He did not move for long minutes. Around the crater, the world held its breath, then his hand twitched. Fingers curled, gripping earth and ash. His chest heaved once, twice, drawing air into lungs that had known the vacuum between moments. The warrior's head lifted, and beneath the shadow of wild black hair, a single eye opened. The other was covered by a strip of leather, stained dark with old blood. That one eye held the weight of 100 battlefields, the light in it fierce and unyielding despite the broken body that housed it. Guts rose to his feet like a dead man refusing the grave. Every movement carried the grinding protest of abused joints, the wet sound of torn muscle forcing itself to function. He swayed, caught himself on the crater's edge, and surveyed the world into which he had been cast. Ruin, corruption, the familiar stench of entities that had no right to exist. His right hand found the hilt of the dragon slayer, and with a grunt of pure animal determination, he wrenched the massive blade free from the earth where it had embedded itself. The weight of it should have been impossible for a mortal man. The length of it exceeded his own height, yet he lifted it as though it were an extension of his own will, settling it across his shoulder with the ease of long practice. From the monastery's shattered gate, movement stirred. Shapes emerged from the shadows, 2 tall figures that moved with the wrong number of joints, their flesh running like wax in places, while other portions had calcified into baroque armor that fused with bone and sinew. They had been men once, perhaps soldiers of the Astra Militarum or PDF troopers who had held this place before the rift opened. Now they were less and more than human, remade by the touch of powers that dwelt in the Sea of Souls. Cultists, warp-touched, damned. Guts had fought their kind before. though they had worn different faces, served different dark masters. The brands they bore, the symbols carved into flesh and etched onto makeshift armor, were unfamiliar in their specifics, but utterly recognizable in their essence. Chaos, corruption, the promise of power in exchange for everything that made a soul worth saving. He had no patience for philosophy, no interest in their reasons or their madness. The first of them came at him with a weapon that might once have been a standard-issue las rifle, now warped and twisted into something that wept ichor from its barrel. The cultist's mouth opened in a shriek that held harmonics no human throat should produce, syllables that tried to claw their way into Guts's mind and rewrite his understanding of reality. The Dragon Slayer moved. It cut through the air with a sound like thunder compressed into a single moment, the displaced atmosphere cracking audibly. The blade met the cultist at the sternum and continued through without slowing, bisecting the corrupted warrior from crown to groin. The two halves fell away in opposite directions, fluids spilling that steamed and hissed where they touched uncorrupted ground. 3 more rushed him from different angles, moving with coordination that spoke of a shared consciousness or a guiding will that puppeted their limbs. Guts pivoted, the Dragon Slayer's momentum carrying it through the rotation, and the blade caught 2 of them in a single sweeping arc. They exploded into wet fragments, their bodies unable to withstand the sheer kinetic force channeled through metal and killing intent. The 4th leaped, claws extended, aiming for Guts's exposed throat. He caught it mid-air with his left hand, fingers closing around its neck with strength that crushed the vertebrae to powder. He held the twitching corpse for a heartbeat, looking into its eyes, seeing the intelligence that flickered there before fading into vacant death. Then he threw it aside and advanced toward the monastery gate. More emerged. 12, 24. They poured from the ruins like insects from a disturbed hive, gibbering and shrieking, their weapons ranging from crude implements to corrupted technology that sparked with warp fire. They wore the symbols of the ruinous powers with zealot pride, the 8-pointed star and sigils of the dark gods painted in blood across their flesh and armor. Guts walked into their midst without hesitation, and the Dragon Slayer began its terrible work. The blade was too large, too heavy, too unwieldy to be a practical weapon by any conventional military doctrine. It should have been slow, predictable, easy to counter, but Guts wielded it with a speed born of desperation refined over years into something approaching art. Each swing generated enough force to shatter ceramite, to cave in rib cages and pulverize skulls. He used the weapon's momentum rather than fighting it, letting each strike flow into the next, turning his entire body into an engine of destruction that never stopped moving. A cultist tried to block with a shield bearing the leering face of a daemon. The Dragon Slayer smashed through it and through the arm holding it and through the cultist's torso, exiting in a spray of bone shards and liquefied organs. Another attempted to flank him, only to catch the weapon's return swing across the knees, severing both legs and sending the screaming torso tumbling across the bloodied ground. They tried to swarm him, to overwhelm through sheer numbers. Guts had fought crowds before. He knew the geometry of close-quarters slaughter, the angles that allowed a single warrior to hold a choke point against dozens. He positioned himself with his back to a collapsed wall, limiting their approach vectors, and met each wave with steel and fury. The Dragon Slayer rose and fell, rose and fell. Each descent ended a life, each ascent sent blood arcing through the poisoned air. His armor took hits, lash bolts scorching black marks across the plating, improvised blades scraping furrows through the metal. None penetrated deep enough to matter. The few that found gaps met muscle hardened by endless combat, flesh that had been cut and burned and broken so many times it had learned to endure. A cultist champion emerged from the press, larger than the others, its body swollen with unnatural growths that pulsed with their own heartbeats. It wielded a chainsword, the teeth running with a speed that blurred them into invisibility, and it brought the weapon down toward Guts's skull with the strength of chemically enhanced muscle. Guts caught the chainsword on the Dragon Slayer's flat, the teeth screaming as they chewed uselessly against metal that had survived encounters with entities far more terrible than corrupted mortals. He twisted, redirecting the force, and the cultist stumbled forward, off balance. The Dragon Slayer reversed, pommel leading, and smashed into the champion's face with enough force to collapse the front of its skull. It fell like a puppet with cut strings. The others faltered. In that moment of hesitation, Guts pressed forward, and the slaughter intensified. He moved through them like a scythe through wheat, each step forward marked by falling bodies and spreading pools of vital fluids. The Dragon Slayer never stopped, its weight and momentum creating a sphere of death that none could penetrate. When they tried to maintain distance, he closed it with frightening speed despite the bulk of his armor. When they tried to mob him, he used their numbers against them, forcing them into each other's paths, creating openings that he exploited with brutal efficiency. A last bolt caught him across the ribs, burning through a gap in the armor, searing flesh. Guts grunted but did not slow. Another struck his thigh, charring skin. He adjusted his stance to compensate for the injury and kept killing. Pain was an old companion, as familiar as the weight of the Dragon Slayer. He had learned long ago to function through it, to let it sharpen rather than dull his focus. The last of the immediate wave fell with its chest caved in, sternum driven back into the heart. Guts stood among the corpses, breathing hard, steam rising from his superheated armor where last fire had struck. Blood dripped from the Dragon Slayer's tip, pattering onto stone already slick with gore. The monastery courtyard had become an abattoir, the ground invisible beneath the layered dead. Silence fell, broken only by his labored breathing and the distant sound of something vast moving within the monastery's depths. He spat blood, his own this time, and began walking toward the ruined gate. Whatever had created the rift, whatever commanded these corrupted wretches, it would be inside. Find it, kill it. The plan had worked for years. It would work here. The gate's archway still bore fragments of imperial iconography, the aquila carved into stone now defaced with profane symbols. Guts passed beneath it without ceremony, entering the darkness beyond. His eye adjusted quickly, the pupil dilating to gather what little light penetrated the corruption-choked interior. The walls were lined with murals that had been magnificent once, depicting the Emperor's glory and the deeds of forgotten heroes. Now they ran with filth, the painted faces distorted into expressions of agony or ecstasy, impossible to distinguish between the two. The corridor stretched ahead, lit by a sick phosphorescent glow that emanated from veins of something crystalline growing through the stone. Guts' boots crunched on fragments of broken statuary. As he advanced, the Dragon Slayer held ready. The air grew thicker with each step, pressing against his skin like invisible hands, carrying whispers in languages he did not know yet somehow understood in the part of the mind that held primal fears. Offers of power, promises of an end to suffering, visions of a world remade where the strong ruled without restraint and the weak existed only to serve. He had heard it all before, in different words from different devils. The answer remained the same. The corridor opened into what had been a chapel, a vaulted space designed to inspire awe in the faithful. The pews had been torn apart and reassembled into structures that hurt to look at directly. Geometries that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the eye could track. At the far end, where an altar to the Emperor should have stood, something else waited. The demon was not large by the standards of its kind. Perhaps twice Guts' height, its form constantly shifting between states of matter, flesh flowing into smoke, into crystal, into flesh again. It wore the suggestion of armor, plates that might have been chitin, or metal, or condensed shadow. Its head bore too many eyes, each one a different color, each one tracking Guts with an intelligence that was ancient and utterly inhuman. Around it, the air rippled with barely contained power, reality growing thin in its presence. Lesser demons capered at its feet, imp-like things with needle teeth and grasping claws, feeding on the ambient corruption that poured from their master like heat from a forge. The demon spoke, and its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, syllables that made Guts' teeth ache and his vision blur. The words were incomprehensible, yet their meaning forced itself into his consciousness. Recognition, hunger. The daemon sensed something in him, a mark or taint that drew it like a shark to blood. It had been waiting for him, though whether for minutes or eternities was impossible to say in this place where time bent like light through broken glass. Guts raised the Dragon Slayer in answer. Words were unnecessary. The language they spoke was older than any tongue. The demon shrieked, and the lesser entities launched themselves forward in a wave of claws and teeth and malice given form. Guts met them head-on, the Dragon Slayer carving through their immaterial flesh with the same ease it found with mortal meat. They burst into clouds of sulphurous smoke where the blade touched them, their essence unable to maintain cohesion in the face of such concentrated violence. One latched onto his arm, teeth sinking through armor into muscle. He smashed it against the floor hard enough to crack the stone, then again and again, until it dissolved into acrid vapor. Another clawed at his face, aiming for his remaining eye. His left hand caught it, crushed it, discarded the twitching remains. The greater demon watched with what might have been amusement, making no move to intervene as its minions died. Only when the last of them had been reduced to dissipating smoke did it step forward, and the chapel's reality buckled under its tread. It moved with impossible speed, crossing the distance in an instant that felt like hours, one massive claw sweeping toward Guts' head. He ducked, felt the displaced air ruffle his hair, and brought the Dragon Slayer up in a diagonal slash aimed at the demon's midsection. The blade connected, cutting deep, and for the first time the demon's amusement fractured into something like surprise, pain. It could feel pain. The wound smoked and hissed, reality trying to reassert itself in the gap the Dragon Slayer had carved. The demon recoiled, its form rippling with instability, and Guts pressed the advantage. He attacked with the relentless precision of a man who had learned that against overwhelming odds, the only path to victory lay in never allowing the enemy time to recover. The Dragon Slayer became a blur of motion, each strike aimed at vital points that existed even in beings of pure warp stuff. The demon blocked with its claws, parried with limbs that sprouted from its torso in defiance of anatomy, but each contact with the blessed, the cursed, the utterly mundane steel of the Dragon Slayer caused it visible distress. It counterattacked with warp fire, gouts of flame that burned in colors that had no place in the material universe. Guts endured, his armor blackening, his flesh blistering beneath. But he did not retreat. He had been burned before. He would burn again. All that mattered was the next strike, the next opening, the incremental progress toward the demon's death. A claw raked across his chest, tearing through armor plate and scoring deep furrows in his flesh. Blood welled, hot and red. Guts roared, the sound torn from some deep place beyond pain or fear, and drove the Dragon Slayer forward with both hands, putting his entire body weight behind the thrust. The point punched through the demon's chest, where something like a heart pulsed with stolen life. The demon convulsed. Its scream was a psychic shockwave that shattered the remaining stained glass, that set the profane altars trembling, that echoed in frequencies too high and too low for mortal hearing. Guts twisted the blade, widening the wound, and the demon's form began to unravel. It thrashed, wild and desperate, landing blows that would have killed a normal man 10 times over. Guts took them, absorbed them, and kept driving the Dragon Slayer deeper. His vision blurred with blood running from a cut above his eye. His breathing came in ragged gasps. Every muscle screamed. None of it mattered. The demon collapsed, its form losing cohesion, bleeding smoke and howling winds from the wound Guts had carved. It tried to speak, to curse or bargain or threaten, but the words dissolved into meaningless static. With a final convulsive shudder, it burst apart, and the psychic pressure that had saturated the chapel vanished like a snuffed candle. Guts stood alone in the sudden silence, the Dragon Slayer still gripped in both hands, its blade dripping with substances that evaporated before reaching the floor. The chapel began to stabilize, the profane decorations crumbling to dust, reality reasserting its natural laws now that the demon's presence no longer warped it. He should have felt triumph, victory, something. Instead, there was only the familiar hollowness, the knowledge that this was one battle in an endless war, that somewhere another demon waited, another monster, another fight that would push him closer to the edge he walked daily. He pulled the Dragon Slayer free from the remnants of the demon's corpse and began the slow walk back toward the entrance, each step a study in controlled agony. Outside, the sky had begun to change. The violet and green corruption was fading, replaced by more natural hues, as though the demon's death had severed whatever connection had allowed the warp to bleed so freely into real space. The three moons resumed their proper orbits. Stars became visible again, cold and distant, and mercifully indifferent. Guts emerged into the courtyard among the bodies he had made and looked up at that clearing sky. He had killed demons before, in a world that now seemed impossibly distant, impossibly lost. He had thought himself beyond surprise at the depths to which reality could sink, the horrors existence could birth. This new world, this nightmare realm of corrupted faith and endless war, suggested he had been wrong, that there were deeper hells than the eclipse, vaster evils than the God Hand, more terrible fates than the brand that marked him for eternal struggle. The realization should have broken something in him. Perhaps it would have, before the Golden Age, before the Band of the Hawk, before Griffith's betrayal and the sacrifice and the endless running battle against destiny itself. Now it simply settled over him like another layer of armor, heavy and familiar. He would survive because that was what he did. He would fight because he knew nothing else. And if this world wanted to throw daemons and corruption and cosmic horror at him, he would meet it the same way he had met everything else since the eclipse, with steel and fury and the absolute refusal to submit. Somewhere in the ruins, a Vox unit crackled to life, its machine spirit struggling against the lingering corruption. Through the static came a voice, human, authoritative, speaking in a language that Guts did not know, yet somehow, through whatever force had brought him here, could comprehend. An inquisitor named Halrix Vane. Forces en route to investigate the warp incursion. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. All survivors to maintain position and prepare for Imperial authority. Guts looked at the Vox unit's location, a half-buried comm terminal in the rubble, then at the spreading field of corpses, then at the Dragon Slayer resting across his shoulder. Survivors, authority, empire. He had served under lords before, fought in armies, followed banners. It always ended the same way. Betrayal or death, or both. This Imperium, whatever it was, would be no different. Every power structure was a cathedral built on skulls, every authority a tyrant wearing different masks. But 6 hours was 6 hours. Time to rest, to bind wounds, to prepare for whatever came next. Guts found a section of wall still standing, sat with his back to it, and laid the Dragon Slayer across his lap. He closed his eye and did not sleep, because sleep invited dreams, and dreams invited memories, and memories were more terrible than any daemon. Instead, he entered a state of controlled stillness, his body recovering what it could while his mind maintained its vigilance. The sky continued clearing. The fires burned themselves out. The dead remained dead. And in the ruins of the monastery of the Ebon Vigil, a warrior from another world waited for the next battle with the patience of a man who knew it was always, inevitably, coming. The Thunderhawk made its approach with the subtlety of an avalanche, its engines screaming as they fought against Charon's Fall's gravity. The pilot, a naval armsman with 3 decades of service, brought the gunship down in the monastery's outer bailey with a precision that spoke of countless combat drops. The assault ramp dropped with a hydraulic hiss, and the Inquisitor's retinue deployed with the practiced efficiency of veterans who had purged heretics across a dozen sectors. Inquisitor Halrix Vane emerged last, as was proper. He was a tall man made taller by the powered armor he wore beneath robes of crimson and black, the colors of his ordo. His face was severe, all hard angles and scar tissue, with augmetic eyes that glowed with a faint blue light as they catalogued the scene before him. A rosarius hung at his throat, the force field generator active, shimmering the air around him in barely perceptible distortions. Behind him came his retinue. Interrogator Wex, young but sharp-minded, his hand never far from the plasma pistol at his hip. Sister Carmina of the Order of the Valorous Heart, her power armor painted in the white and crimson of her order, a heavy bolter maglocked to her back. Tech Priest Engine Seer Zeth 9, more machine than man, mechadendrites writhing like steel serpents as he analyzed atmospheric data. And finally, Castor and Pollux, the twin crusaders, their storm shields and power mauls held ready, their blank helms revealing nothing of the zealots beneath. They spread out in standard search formation, moving through the courtyard with weapons raised. Sister Carmina's heavy bolter swept across the field of corpses, the targeting reticule in her helmet display finding nothing living, nothing moving. The dead cultists lay where they had fallen, their bodies already beginning the accelerated decay that warp-touched flesh experienced when the animating power withdrew. Halrix observed in silence, his augmetic eyes recording every detail, feeding information to the cogitator implanted in his skull. 73 confirmed kills visible from this position, all executed with edged weapons, trauma patterns consistent with a massive blade, impractically oversized by standard Imperial specifications. No evidence of ranged weapon use, no deployment of grenades or other area denial munitions. A single combatant had to be. The thought troubled him more than the carnage itself. One warrior, alone, against a warp incursion of this magnitude. The rift itself had sealed. That much was clear from the atmospheric readings Zeth-9 provided, but it had been active for at least 72 hours before closure. Long enough for dozens, if not hundreds, of demonic entities to manifest. Long enough for the corruption to spread deep into the monastery's structure. Yet here stood the monastery, defiled but intact. And here lay the dead, all of them heretics or worse. Interrogator Wex called out, his voice tight with controlled alarm. Halrix moved to join him, the Crusaders flanking automatically. Wex stood at the entrance to the chapel, his plasma pistol raised, aimed at something within. Halrix saw. The warrior sat against the far wall, beneath a defaced mural of Saint Celestine. His armor was black and silver, unfamiliar in design, showing signs of catastrophic damage that should have been lethal. Burns scored the plating. Deep gouges revealed the flesh beneath. One pauldron was missing entirely. Blood stained him, some fresh, most dried to a rust-brown crust. Across his lap rested the weapon. Even at this distance, Halrix could feel the wrongness of it, a sensation that prickled at the back of his mind. It was too large, too crude, yet it radiated a sense of purpose that transcended its physical dimensions. More than metal, less than relic, something forged in the fires of absolute necessity and quenched in blood. The warrior's eye opened. One eye. The other hidden behind a strip of leather that might once have been white, but had long since faded to grey with age and staining. That single eye fixed on Halrix, with an intensity that made the Inquisitor's hand move involuntarily toward his own weapon, a master-crafted bolt pistol blessed by Cardinal Xanatov himself. Neither spoke. The moment stretched, tension building like a drawn bowstring. Finally, the warrior moved. Slowly, telegraphing his intentions, he lifted the massive blade and drove it point first into the stone floor beside him. It sank in to a depth of 6 inches, the ease of penetration suggesting either exceptional sharpness or strength that bordered on inhuman. Then he simply sat, hands resting on his knees, waiting, a gesture of non-aggression. Or a trap. Halrix had not survived 4 decades in the Inquisition by taking things at face value. He stepped forward, past Wex, ignoring the interrogator's whispered protest. The Crusaders moved with him, shields raised, positioning themselves to intercept any attack. Sister Carmina took a position at the chapel entrance, her heavy bolter trained on the warrior's center mass. If treachery revealed itself, she could fill this space with mass-reactive rounds before a normal man could blink. Halrix doubted it would be enough. He stopped 10 paces from the warrior, far enough to react, close enough to read intent in body language and micro-expressions. His augmetic eyes analyzed what they could see, feeding data to his awareness in streams of text and probability matrices. Height, 2.1 meters. Estimated mass, 120 kilograms, most of it muscle and scar tissue. Age, difficult to determine, somewhere between 25 and 40 standard years. Biometric readings consistent with baseline human, no obvious signs of genetic enhancement or warp corruption, yet the man had killed daemons. The chapel reeked of their dissolution, the lingering stench of entities banished from real space. Halrix could see the traces, smears of ectoplasm still evaporating into nothing, scorch marks where immaterial flesh had burned. He spoke, his voice amplified slightly by the vox grill in his armor. "I am Inquisitor Halrix Vane, of the Ordo Malleus. You stand in the ruins of an imperial monastery on the world of Charon's Fall. Identify yourself." The warrior's eye never left Halrix. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Halrix wondered if he understood Gothic at all. Then he spoke, his voice rough, gravelly, the words shaped by a throat that had screamed too many times. Guts. Just the one word. A name, perhaps, though it sounded more like a descriptor. Halrix waited for elaboration that did not come. "You are not of the Astra Militarum," Halrix continued, cataloguing the armor's foreign design, "nor the Adeptus Astartes. Your equipment bears no imperial markings. Your presence here coincides with a major warp incursion. Explain." Guts looked at him for another long moment, then shrugged, a gesture that sent flakes of dried blood drifting from his armor. "Rift opened, pulled me through, landed here, killed what needed killing." The simplicity of the statement was almost offensive, as though the destruction of a daemon strong enough to tear reality and corrupt an entire monastery garrison was merely incidental labor, the work of an afternoon. Halrix felt the stirrings of anger beneath his professional detachment. "The rift," he said, keeping his tone level. "You closed it." "No. Thing I killed must have been keeping it open. It died, rift sealed. Logical." Tech Priest Zeth 9 had already theorized as much based on the timing of the warp disturbance's cessation, but logic and truth were not always allies, especially when the warp was involved. "Walk me through it," Halrix commanded. "Step by step. Leave nothing out." Guts did, his recounting stripped of emotion or embellishment. Arrival through the rift, the crater, the cultist wave, the chapel, the daemon, the fight. Each sentence was economical, precise, the account of a man who viewed combat as a technical problem with technical solutions. No mention of fear, no hint of doubt, just the methodical description of how he had killed everything between him and his objective. Halrix listened, his cogitator recording every word, analyzing patterns of speech, searching for inconsistencies. He found none. Either the warrior was telling the truth, or he was a liar of extraordinary skill. Given the evidence scattered across the monastery, truth seemed more likely. When Guts finished, Halrix stood silent for a moment, processing. Then he asked the question that had been forming since he first saw the massive blade. "What are you?" Guts' expression did not change. "A man. Men do not kill greater daemons alone. I do." The flatness of the response, the utter absence of pride or bravado, made it somehow more disturbing than any boast would have been. Halrix had met warriors who claimed great deeds, most exaggerated, some lied outright. This man stated a fact with the same inflection he might use to describe the color of the sky. Sister Carmina's voice came through the vox, tight with tension. "Inquisitor, we should bind him. Subject him to the proper purification rites. His exposure to warp entities, his survival, it all suggests taint." A reasonable suggestion. Standard protocol demanded that any survivors of demonic contact undergo extensive screening for possession or corruption. Many innocents had died in such purges, but better 1,000 innocent deaths than one corrupted soul escaping to spread its poison. Yet Halrix hesitated. Something about this warrior did not fit the standard patterns of corruption. The warp touched its victims with recognizable signs: mutation, madness, and hunger for forbidden knowledge. This man showed none of that. His mind seemed brutally sane, focused on survival and nothing more complex. His flesh bore scars but no mutations. And the blade, that massive, impossible blade, resonated with something that was not quite warp taint but not quite clean either. A mystery. Halrix had not earned his position by ignoring mysteries. "Stand," he commanded. "Slowly. Keep your hands visible." Guts complied, rising with the careful movements of a man accustomed to being surrounded by potential enemies. He stood a full head, taller than Halrix, the bulk of him imposing even without the armor. His remaining eye tracked each member of the retinue, categorizing threats, calculating distances. A warrior's habit, impossible to suppress, even when attempting cooperation. "The blade," Halrix said. "I want to examine it." For the first time, something flickered in Guts's expression. Not quite refusal, but close. His hand moved fractionally toward the hilt before he caught himself, forced his arm back to his side. The gesture spoke volumes. The weapon was not just a tool to him, it was identity, security, perhaps the only constant in an existence defined by struggle. "I will not damage it," Halrix assured, though his word meant nothing to a stranger. "I merely wish to understand what it is." After a moment that felt far longer than its objective duration, Guts nodded. Halrix approached, his augmetic eyes focusing, magnifying, analyzing. Up close, the blade was even more disturbing. The metal showed signs of impossible abuse, nicks and stress fractures that should have caused structural failure. Yet it remained whole, the edge still keen despite the absence of any obvious maintenance. No maker's mark, no benedictions in High Gothic, no purity seals or litanies of function, just metal. And yet, Halrix extended one gauntleted hand, fingers stopping just short of touching the blade's surface. Even without contact, he could feel it. A pressure, a weight, the accumulated residue of countless deaths, each one adding to the weapon's essential nature. It had killed so much, so often, for so long that it had transcended its origin as mere forged steel. The warp feared this blade. Not because of sacred rites or blessed oils, but because it represented absolute, undiluted refusal. The will of a man who had stared into the abyss, recognized its hunger, and chosen to fight anyway, forever, until one or the other ceased to exist. Halrix withdrew his hand. He had seen enough. "Tech priest," he said, not looking away from Guts. "Your assessment." Zeth 9 approached with the cautious reverence appropriate when examining potential archaeotech. His mechadendrites extended, sensors active, scanning the blade across multiple spectrums. He hummed and clicked, the sounds more machine than human, processing data through augmented neural pathways. "Fascinating," he said, the word emerging from his vocabulator with flat mechanical precision. "The metallurgical composition is within baseline human technological capability, no evidence of Xenos materials or DAOT construction. Yet the molecular structure shows signs of tempering under conditions that should not be survivable for conventional forge work. Stress patterns indicate usage far exceeding normal life cycle expectations. In plain Gothic, Zeth, it should have shattered long ago, Inquisitor. That it has not suggests either divine providence or exposure to forces that have altered its fundamental nature. I detect trace amounts of residual energy consistent with warp contact, but the signature is unusual, not corruption, more like scarring, as if the blade has been thrust through the veil so many times it has developed an immunity to the immaterium's touch. Halrix processed this, his mind working through the implications. A weapon that had somehow learned to harm daemons through sheer accumulated experience. The concept bordered on the heretical, suggesting that will and repetition could achieve what prayer and blessing were meant to accomplish. Yet here stood the evidence, impossible to dismiss. He made his decision. "You will accompany us," he said to Guts. "Charon's fall is not yet secure. The rift may have closed, but corruption lingers. There will be pockets of cultists, perhaps lesser daemons, still manifested. Your skills would be useful in the purge to come." It was not a request, though he phrased it as such. Guts understood this, his expression unchanging. "And if I refuse, then you will be detained as a potential vector for demonic taint, subject to interrogation and purification rites that would make the demons you fought seem merciful." Halrix kept his voice level, factual, no threat, merely consequence. "Or you can fight. You are skilled. You might kill some of us, perhaps all of us. But the Imperium's response would be total. Orbital bombardment within the day. The entire world scoured to ash to ensure no corruption spreads." Guts was silent, considering. Halrix could see the calculation in his eye, weighing options, measuring odds. A survivor's instinct, always looking for the path forward. "I'll come," Guts said finally. "But I keep my sword." "Agreed." Halrix gestured to the Crusaders, who lowered their shields fractionally, still wary but no longer poised to strike. "Wex, secure his equipment, get him proper medical attention and a vox bead. Sister Carmina, perimeter sweep. I want confirmation that this monastery is clean before we move to secondary sites." The retinue moved to comply, their training overriding their evident discomfort with this arrangement. Guts retrieved the Dragon Slayer from the floor with casual strength, settling it across his shoulder as though it weighed nothing. Wex approached with a medic kit, his movements careful, non-threatening. "The burns need treatment," Wex said, professional detachment warring with fascination. "Infection risk is severe." Guts glanced at the wounds, scoring his flesh, blackened edges still weeping clear fluid. "I've had worse. I do not doubt it." Nevertheless, Guts allowed the treatment, standing motionless as Wex applied counterseptic and synth skin, his hands working with practiced efficiency. The warrior did not flinch, even when the Medicae substances bit into raw flesh, catalyzing accelerated healing. Whatever threshold for pain he possessed, it exceeded anything Wex had seen in standard humans. Halrix watched this, his mind already working through the problems this new asset presented. The Conclave would need to be informed. Questions would be asked about where this warrior originated, what authority the Inquisitor possessed to commandeer him. Standard procedure demanded extensive testing before deploying unknown elements in combat operations. But standard procedure had not anticipated a man who could kill greater daemons with a sword forged by unknown hands in unknown lands. Flexibility was the mark of successful Inquisitors. Halrix had long ago learned when to follow the Codex and when to write new chapters. Outside, the 3 moons of Charon's fall hung in a sky now blessedly clear of warp taint. The monastery's shadow stretched long across the blasted earth, reaching toward the horizon where other sites of corruption waited. The purge would take weeks, perhaps months. There were always survivors, always deeper pockets of infestation than initial sweeps revealed. They would need every advantage, every weapon, even a stranger from nowhere, carrying a blade that should not exist, with an eye that had seen hells beyond naming. Halrix turned to Guts, who now wore a vox bead clipped to his ear, its archaic design looking almost primitive against the baroque complexity of Imperial technology. "What drove you?" he asked, the question emerging before he could question its relevance. "To fight alone against such odds. What purpose compelled you?" Guts looked at him, and for the first time, something resembling emotion crossed his scarred features. Not pride or righteousness or zealotry, something bleaker, harder. "No purpose," he said. "Just survival. Keep moving, keep fighting. Anything that tries to kill me dies first. And when everything tries to kill you, then I kill everything." The simplicity of it was almost beautiful in its horror. No grand crusade, no faith in gods or emperors, just the raw, unending refusal to die that had somehow carried this man through circumstances that should have broken him 1,000 times over. Halrix realized, in that moment, that he was looking at something rare, not a saint, not a hero, but a man who had been ground down to the absolute core of what humanity could be when stripped of everything except the will to persist. The Imperium would devour him eventually. It devoured everything, processed all things into fuel for the endless war machine. But until that inevitable end, Halrix would use him, would point him at the enemies of mankind and watch as that terrible sword did its work. It was pragmatic. It was necessary. And deep in the part of Halrix that remained human beneath the augmetics and the authority and the weight of secrets, he felt something uncomfortably close to pity. The galaxy had gained a weapon. And weapons were always, inevitably, broken through use. The Valkyrie screamed through Charon's Fall's atmosphere, its hull rattling with atmospheric turbulence, carrying Halrix's team toward the second corruption site. Intelligence reports placed it in the ruins of Hive Tertius, a sprawling industrial complex that had processed agri-products for the entire southern continent. Now it stood silent, its factorums empty, its workers either dead or fled into the wasteland. Something had made a nest there. something that left survivors babbling about shadows with too many teeth and promises whispered in their own voices. Guts sat in the passenger compartment, surrounded by soldiers who tried very hard not to stare at him. The Dragon Slayer rested across his lap, mag-locked to keep it from shifting during flight. He had accepted a flak jacket, standard guard issue, though it fit poorly across his broader frame. Beneath it, Wex had done what he could to treat the accumulated damage, but Guts moved like a man carrying fresh injuries on top of old wounds that had never properly healed. Sister Carmina sat across from him, her heavy bolter propped beside her, her helmet on but visor raised. Her eyes, dark and penetrating, studied him with the intensity of a theologian confronting a heretical text. Finally, she spoke. "You do not pray." It was not a question. Guts glanced at her, then away, watching the landscape blur past through the Valkyrie's viewport. "No. Do you believe in the God Emperor?" "Don't know what that is." The admission created a ripple of shock through the compartment. Even the pilot, isolated in the cockpit, shifted as though the words had physical weight. Sister Carmina's hand moved to the bolt pistol at her hip, not drawing, but readying. "Ignorance of the Emperor is no shield against heresy," she said, her voice carrying the iron certainty of unshakable faith. "All of humanity lives beneath his light. To claim ignorance is to claim impossibility." Guts looked at her directly now, his single eye meeting hers without flinching. "Where I come from, there are no emperors, no gods worth following, just people trying to survive and things trying to kill them. Then where you come from is damned, probably." The flatness of his agreement seemed to rob Carmina of her righteous momentum. She had expected denial, perhaps argument. Instead, he had simply accepted the condemnation as though it were weather, inevitable and beyond control. Halrix, seated near the cockpit, intervened before the sister could press further. "Save your evangelism, Carmina. We have more immediate concerns." The Vox crackled, the pilot's voice cutting through. "Approaching target zone, setting down in 3 minutes. Sensors are showing movement in the Factorum complex, multiple heat signatures. Could be survivors, could be hostiles." "Assume hostiles," Halrix ordered. "Combat deployment. Wex, take the Auspex. Zeth 9, I want structural analysis. Identify weak points in case we need to bring the entire complex down. Crusaders, standard formation." "Sister Carmina, overwatch position once we secure a foothold." He turned to Guts. "You will advance with the Crusaders. Engage any demonic entities or corrupted individuals. Avoid civilian casualties if possible, but survival takes precedence." Guts nodded, his hand finding the Dragon Slayer's hilt, the gesture automatic. The Valkyrie banked hard, descending toward a cleared landing zone amid the Factorum's scattered outbuildings. Through the viewport, Guts could see the main complex, a massive structure of corrugated metal and rockcrete, its walls scarred with blast marks and strange organic growths that pulsed with sickly bioluminescence. The assault ramp dropped, and they deployed into a world of rust and shadow. The ground was slick with some kind of organic residue, viscous and faintly warm, that squelched beneath boots. The air carried a smell like spoiled meat mixed with industrial solvents, sharp enough to make eyes water. Overhead, the sky had darkened, thick clouds gathering despite the absence of meteorological cause. The Crusaders took point, their storm shields forming a mobile wall. Behind them came Guts, the Dragon Slayer held ready, his augmented senses cataloging every detail. The way sound deadened in this place, absorbed by the organic matter coating every surface. The faint vibration in the ground, as though something vast breathed beneath the foundations. The wrongness that prickled at the base of his skull, familiar from 1,000 other places where reality had worn thin. They advanced through the outbuildings without contact, though evidence of violence surrounded them. Bodies, or what remained of them, scattered like broken dolls. Workers in their industrial coveralls, torn apart with surgical precision, their parts arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Guts had seen worse. He kept moving. The main Factorum entrance yawned before them, a loading bay designed to accommodate bulk transports, now empty except for the shadows that seemed to writhe with independent motion. Wex consulted his auspex, the device's machine spirit, struggling against the ambient corruption. "Multiple contacts," he reported, his voice tight. "Inside. Humanoid. But the readings are erratic. Biometric signatures fluctuating." "Possessed," Sister Carmina said, her tone matter-of-fact. "The daemon has claimed their flesh." Halrix activated his force sword, the blade igniting with pale blue energy as the weapon's psychically reactive circuits responded to his will. "Advance. Engage on contact. Remember, these were Imperial citizens once. Grant them the Emperor's mercy swiftly." They entered the Factorum, and the darkness swallowed them. The interior was a cathedral of industry, vast open spaces filled with processing equipment gone silent, conveyor belts frozen mid-operation, vats of chemical compounds left to stagnate, emergency lighting flickered, casting everything in intermittent red that turned the organic growths into glistening wounds across the metal surfaces. Movement in the shadows. Figures shambled forward, their movements disjointed, limbs bending at angles that defied human anatomy. They had been workers, yes, but now they wore their flesh like poorly fitted suits. Faces split vertically, revealing mouths full of mismatched teeth. Eyes multiplied across foreheads and cheeks, each one tracking independently. Some dragged industrial tools, wrenches and cutting torches and pneumatic riveters, wielding them with the innocent malice of children who had discovered violence. The Crusaders met them with shield and maul, power weapons cracking as they pulverized corrupted flesh. Guts moved to their flank, the Dragon Slayer sweeping in wide arcs that bisected multiple targets with each pass. The possessed workers died shrieking, their voices overlapping, creating harmonics that spoke names in tongues that predated human language. More came. They poured from the depths of the Factorum, dozens of them, then scores, an entire workforce transformed into a tide of corrupted flesh. Guts planted himself at a choke point between two processing vats, limiting their approach, and the Dragon Slayer became a blur of violence. Each swing was economy incarnate. No wasted motion, no flourish. The blade rose, fell, rose again, each cycle ending at least one existence, and often several.